Well, good morning. Good to see everyone. I want to say Happy New Year, and I want to give a shout out to our friends in Gallup Christian Church as well here today. And I was thinking about talking about the future of the church. And each year during the first of the year, we kind of talk about big picture sort of stuff. But this year is a little bit different in that we're talking big picture here for Gallup or for Valley View, but we're also talking about Gallup Christian Church as well. And so I want to kind of enlarge our idea of the kingdom and think not just one church, but two churches here today in two different locations. But as we do, I've really kind of been pondering over the last several weeks, God, where do you want this church to go? And even more, what do you want for Valley View Christian Church? And not only that, what do you want for Gallup Christian Church as well? And I think about that. It's the year 2020. It's kind of odd to say 2020. In fact, I saw something this week that said that we are as far away from 1990 as we are 2050. And that made me feel really old because I graduated in 1990. But that's kind of where we are. And so we think about 2020, we are definitely where a lot of us would say, this is the future. We're living in it in the here and now. So think about that. I actually did a little Google search of what did people 100, 125 years ago, or even 50 years ago, envision the world would look like in the year 2020. And so I actually found several sources, but one of them actually had some artwork that kind of gave us a little bit of a picture. Here's one of them. This is what they envisioned education would look like: electrodes and grinding up books and transferring all the information in. Now, while that's kind of really sci-fi, we do have the internet. So that is a reality. Also, I think about transportation. People envision flying cars, moving sidewalks. Been to the airport lately. Cars that fuel really every few months, and even self-driving cars. And we rented a car a couple weeks ago that had driver assist on it. Me ever driven a car with driver assist? That is absolutely, I want to drive the car. And if I want to drift off a little bit, I want to drift off a little bit, because if I drift a little bit too far to the right, the steering wheel will go and put me right in the center of the lane. I also think about the fact of how people envision what the future would be like. In fact, there was a Time magazine article that envisioned that there would be a completely automated world, that we would all be making $300,000 or $400,000 a year doing nothing, because everything would be automated. In fact, kind of take a look at this. This is what they envisioned. This is where the Roomba came from, by the way. Again, thinking the whole entire world would be robotic and so on, but also video communication. They envisioned a world where video communication would be a reality. I don't know if that's where Steve Jobs came up with the idea of FaceTiming or exactly what, but that's kind of where we are today. Just yesterday, we talked with our family, our kids and our grandkids in Indiana, and we probably spent 45 minutes just FaceTiming, taking the iPad to various parts of the room, letting different members of our family talk. But even on Christmas Day, whether it be through Skype or FaceTime, we were probably on that for 3 to 4 hours throughout the day, talking to family. And so that's kind of where we are. There's actually people envisioned in the future that every move we make will be monitored by someone. I'm just going to leave that one right there. But with our cell phones and tracking technology and different things, I think we're there. Now, in 1993, I was sitting in a lecture hall at Dallas Christian College, and I was in my philosophy class. And I remember a prediction that Dr. Young, who was the professor, made. And he said, I don't know when it will happen, but I envision soon that in the church in the United States of America, the test of fellowship will not be about Jesus. The test of fellowship, in other words, I'm willing to be around you as a Christian, would all center around what a person's political values were. In other words, churches would draw a line in the sand and say, you are either for me or against me. And it's not about Jesus, it's about what party you belong to and what political philosophy you adhere to. And over the last 25 years, I've actually seen that happen. I've actually seen where churches are more passionate about their political stance than they are about people who are far from God finding God through Jesus. In fact, to illustrate this, and I share this because I don't think that this is an isolated conversation, but I overheard a conversation one time. In fact, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop or anything like that. I just overheard it, and I kind of wish I wouldn't have, but it's a reality. One person was telling another person about a friend of theirs who had recently, within like the last year, became a Christian. They started following Christ. And there was great joy as they were talking about their friend following Jesus. But as they were talking about their friend following Jesus, the joy was not in that they now have an eternal home with Jesus in heaven. Their joy was not being set free from addiction. Their joy was not the fact that they have normalcy in their marriage or whatever it might be. Their joy came in this statement right here. And now, since they became a Christian, they are more conservative. So that was the joy. That was the win. The win was a political win. And I think that probably happens way too often in the church. I want to share something with you. In fact, I shared with the staff that I was going to say this today, and one of them said, this is like steel-toe boot sort of moment. So this is a steel-toe boot sort of moment. We don't help people follow Jesus so that they'll look like us. We help people follow Jesus so they'll look like him. That's our goal. In fact, if we help people follow Jesus and they end up looking like me, we have failed miserably, right? We don't want them to look like us. We want them to look like Jesus. And I'm here to tell you, Jesus wants more for his church than for us to be involved in the latest political debate. Jesus wants more for his church than for us to draw lines in the sand and say, it has to be that you agree with me politically or there's no fellowship, there's no relationship. Jesus wants more for his church than for us just to be in the quagmire of whatever is happening in this world, because he has called us to an eternal kingdom. He has called us to a kingdom that is not here, but rather in heaven. So the question that I think we have to ask here today is, how do we involve ourselves in that which is truly kingdom-minded, truly eternal? And I want to pose a couple of questions. I want to pose a couple of questions here today, and as we pose these questions, I think they're kind of dangerous, risky questions to ask, but one of them is, what is Jesus for? What is Jesus for? In fact, I'll just go as far as to say this. It will be real easy for us to talk about what Jesus is for. In fact, we could almost carry that into what Jesus is against, but let's just talk about what Jesus is for here for a second. I kind of think about the Sermon on the Mount. Best sermon ever preached in all humanity. Jesus on a mountainside saying, you've heard that it was said, but I tell you, time and time again. But in this sermon that Jesus preached, I can say this is what Jesus is for. He is for discipleship. He is for us growing in our walk with him. He is for us having a great witness in our world. He is for righteousness and right behavior. He is for sexual purity. He is for marriage. He is for us having honesty in the way that we deal with people. He is for how we deal with people who are not like us and making sure that we maintain our witness. He's for prayer. He is for giving. He is for fasting. He's for all of this stuff. But I think it's dangerous if we only spend our time on what Jesus is for, because if we spend all of our time on what Jesus is for, we create a moral code. And it's not necessarily saying it's wrong to have a moral code. But Jesus first called us to him. He said, follow me. We're called to a person. We're called to follow Jesus. And in that, we choose to imitate him. And by virtue of that, we adhere to a moral code. But Jesus has to be first. But there's another question. And it's not just what is Jesus for. I think we have to ask who Jesus is for. And I think in exploring this gets dangerous. This gets messy when we ask this question. In fact, last week, we looked at a passage of Scripture in Luke chapter 5. We looked at a passage of Jesus inviting people to be followers of him. And that's the infamous that, come follow me, I will make you fishers of men, or from now on you will fish for men. That's Jesus calling people out of one life and into another. But Jesus wasn't done in Luke chapter 5. In fact, we find in Luke chapter 5, starting with verse 27, something pretty amazing is that it's not what Jesus does, it's who Jesus is with. It says, after this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at a tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his house, and there were a large company of tax collectors and others reclining with him, or at the table with him. And the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Now, to really understand this particular passage here, I think we have to unpack the whole notion and idea of tax collector. And I've really kind of racked my brain, trying to figure out how to explain tax collector. That's a very common theme in Scripture, but we really don't have a comparison in the American culture today. I think we could maybe put a bunch of comparisons in a blender and maybe come close. And we could take, the IRS, and we could take a used car salesman, and you take about all these different things and throw them into a blender and maybe get there. But let me just give you this. Let's just imagine in our minds, and this is not a political statement. It's not that I fear of this happening, but it's just this might gravitate to help us understand. Let's imagine that something happened in the United States of America that the United Nations said, we're going to step in and rule this place. We're going to step in and govern everything that is happening here. And many of the citizens of our nation who have allegiance first to our nation say, no, we're going to go work for the occupying force. We would consider them as acting of their own interest, acting with treason, acting in a way that is betraying our very fabric of life. And so that's kind of what tax collectors did. There was an occupying force that came in, and rather than seeking the best interest of those around them, they sought their own interest and the interest of Rome, and they became probably the most hated class of people. And Jesus is talking to a tax collector. He goes up to him, and he speaks to him. He speaks to him, and that in and of itself, Jesus crossed the line. Jesus crossed the boundary. He said, you don't go there. But he immediately walked up to Levi, or we could also call him Matthew. He walks up to Levi, and he says, follow me. But he doesn't just talk to him. He calls him out of one life into another. And that's one of the things that we have to understand is really we're getting to the heart of Jesus. But after calling him out of one life and into another, one of the things that Jesus does is he goes into his house. He goes into his house, he goes into his turf and in his space, and he hangs out with him there. I think that's an important thing for us. Jesus went where the messy people were and didn't always wait for messy people to come to him. So let me ask you, what Jesus' actions toward Levi actually said. You see, I'm convinced that Jesus' actions toward Levi said, Levi, I'm for you. And if Jesus was for Levi, I can make another connection, and the connection is this. Jesus is for broken people. Jesus is for broken people. And I know some of you are probably saying, but Brandon, but what about? We're not going to talk about what about here today. I just want to say that Jesus is for broken people. Now, with that, let me ask this question. Do you know somebody other than yourself who is broken? Do you know somebody who is broken and their brokenness bleeds everywhere? I mean, they just irritate you because it just seems like their brokenness is, it impacts everyone around them, and not necessarily in a good way. Do you know someone who is broken and you don't agree with what they do? Do you know someone who is broken that you look at what they do and say it is wrong and sinful? Do you know somebody who is broken that you look at it and say what you're doing is hurting other people, or it's downright disgusting? I think all of us could probably fill in the blank a little bit and go, well, I know this person and this person. And they're all of that. But here's the reality. If we were to ask the people that were around during the day of Jesus, when Jesus went into Levi's house, what did you think of Levi? They would say, he's downright disgusting. His actions are hurtful. His actions are sinful. His actions are wrong. You know, everything about him, it's just his brokenness was bleeding everywhere, and it was hurting people. And it was keeping him far from God. But with that, I reiterate, Jesus is for broken people. And that means he's for you. That means he's for me. And that means he's for a whole lot of people that sometimes we want to write off as too broken. But you know, as the story unfolds, there's a little bit more of controversy and drama that ensues. You see, Jesus went into Levi's house, and as he went into Levi's house, Levi threw this big feast, and it wasn't just a small, intimate gathering with Jesus and his followers and Levi. Levi invited all his friends. He invited his circle. And so one of the things that we have to understand about people in general, I mean, I think probably in the United States of America, there are literally thousands of subcultures. But here's what happens. People cluster with people who are like them. That's just a very fact of human nature. So we tend to gravitate toward people who are like us. And broken people tend to gravitate toward people who are similarly broken. And so in this instance, Jesus is not just at the house of a tax collector, he's at a party with tax collectors. And the religious people of the day are saying, doesn't work, because he's together and he's with them. And it's just a very fact of how life works. In fact, I'll tell you a story. It happened here probably 12 or 15 years ago. It was kind of an interesting Sunday, and I can't remember every Sunday, but I remember this one. I remember this one. We were in what is now the gathering area, but I was standing out by where the coffee pots are right now. That used to be our main entrance and exit into the in and out of the church. And as I was standing there, I saw something happen on that particular day, in that particular service, that really illustrated the fact that people of equal brokenness tend to just find one another, kind of gravitate toward one another. In fact, there was a lady here in the church. She had a grandson. Grandson had trouble with the law. He was addicted to meth. There was a lot of problems in his life. He floated in and out. It was not unusual to see him, and always loved to see him. But then there was another lady in the church. She brought her niece that Sunday. Her niece was addicted to meth, and as this lady referred to her niece, she is an employee of Central Avenue. You can kind of fill in the blank as far as what her profession was. So anyway, we have these two young people at the same service. never met one another, didn't know each other, but within about 2 minutes of the service ending, they found one another. And I was actually talking to her aunt at the time, and she said, when I walked in here today and I saw that kid, I prayed that she would not find him. But we try to go around people who have similar brokenness because it affirms our brokenness, validates that we're okay. But here's one of the realities. One of the realities is people thought that Jesus, by associating, was affirming. They thought that Jesus, by associating with these people, was affirming that they were okay. He was putting a stamp of approval on there. So Jesus clarifies things. He clarifies what's happening here. And if you look at verse 31, Jesus clarifies. He says, and Jesus answered them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. In other words, Jesus says, I'm not just for broken people, I'm for the whole broken community. Matthew brought in his community. He brought in a circle. And people were ticked off that Jesus was around him. He said, listen, I'm for these people. I'm for the broken. I'm for the messy. And folks, one of the things Jesus said, listen, it's the sick who need a doctor. It's the sick who need a doctor, not the well. What does the church need to be? We need to be a hospital for the sick, not a spa for the spiritually bloated. We need to be a hospital for those who are hurting and sick and messy, because Jesus is for them. In fact, when you think about our community right now, when you are driving around, when you're in your neighborhood, when you're at your work, when you're at Walmart or Smith's or wherever it is, do you see the brokenness? Do you see the desperation? Do you see the pain? Do you see the addiction? Or do you see somebody that you look at them and go, they're just wasting my money. They were wasting my time. They were wasting my energy. I bet they're just a drain on society. Jesus is for them. And if Jesus is for them, as a church, we are called to be for them as well. And so the question is, does the community know that we are for them? Do your neighbors know that you are for them? Do your coworkers know? Do the parents of your kids' friends know that you are for them, even if you don't agree with what they're doing? Let me let you in on a little secret. It's a secret about guys like me. It's a secret of church and kind of the big picture of church. Churches tend to be a little bit competitive. Churches tend to be a little bit competitive, like businesses. And so if one church is doing something really well, do you know what other churches do? They have little talks like, well, did you hear about what such and such church is doing? We need to step up our game. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily always about finding people who are far from God and helping them find God through Jesus. It's about market share. It's about being the best church in the community. And I've heard pastors say that, and I may have said that before in my lifetime. We just want to be the best church in the community. What if we stopped? What if we stopped trying to be the best church in the community and instead focused on being the best church for the community? What if we stopped trying to be better than this church down here or the church up the road, and we just said, we want to be here for the people that Jesus is for. We just want to meet them where they are. We want to be for them, and that can mean us in our neighborhoods. That can mean us in our jobs, and it can mean what we do here as a church. And we do a lot in our church, and it's very strategic. Almost 100 backpacks full of food go out every Wednesday afternoon to children in our school system so that they'll have food on Friday afternoon when they go home from school. That's no small thing. We have a food pantry every month, and we see over 100 families that are served, and they receive food and nourishment through what we do here. And I think about the fact that we had Love Week, and we're going to be ramping up for that and planning for that, but that's about meeting people on their turf, on their level, because we love them and we're for them. But I pray that it's not just a church-wide thing. I pray that all of us kind of develop this passion to understand, I'm here for people. I'm here for my community. But here's the beautiful thing, folks, and I just want to lay this out. This is my favorite part. This is my favorite part of this message is Jesus is for broken people, and he's for the broken community, but he makes one statement that indicates really what Jesus wants for people. He says in verse 32, I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. In fact, I want to read this out of the Message Bible. In the Message Bible, it says, Jesus heard about this. Going back to verse 31. Jesus heard about it and spoke up. Who needs a doctor, the healthy or the sick? I'm here inviting outsiders, not insiders. An invitation to a changed life, changed inside and out. Repentance is change. Repentance is a radical life change that begins on the inside, and it keeps working out. And so I'm going to say it like this. Jesus is so for people, he is not willing to leave them where they are. I mean, they were accusing Jesus of entering into the messiness of people's lives and the mess of who they are and all that they've done. And Jesus says, listen, I want to enter into that mess, because if I enter into the mess, there's a chance that they're not going to stay there. So let's talk about us. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about me here today. I don't know your mess. I don't. But I can say with relative certainty that the vast majority of us in here today have some kind of mess that we're dealing with. And the mess that you're dealing with, you may want to just kind of keep between you and God. And in fact, you hope it stays between you and God. You might be dealing with some kind of addiction. You might be dealing with the fact that you're acting out to get attention or to get affection. And you may be thinking that if I just get one more step ahead, that the mess is going to go away. And you may be thinking that life is okay now, but when is the next shoe going to drop? You may be thinking life is okay right now, but all I can deal with is the regret and the pain and the guilt of my life. And you may be thinking that my marriage cannot handle one more storm. I don't know what your mess is, but I do know with 100% certainty that Jesus wants your mess. He wants to meet you in your mess, but he loves you too much, and he is so for you. He does not want to leave you there. He doesn't want to leave you in the messiness of your life. He wants to redeem it. He wants to pull you out. He wants to give you freedom from it. And it's not just for you. It's for our friends, and it's for our coworkers, and it's for our family members, and it's even for the guy driving by right now, looking at the cars in the parking lot going, bunch of crazies. Jesus wants that for them as well. So what do we do? I want to ask one more question here today, and we're going to form this in our bottom line. Because I realize Jesus wants a whole lot more for us than what we want for us. I want to say it like this. What if we spent more time and energy on who Jesus is for than what we're against? So many times, I'll just tell you, be honest with you, people who are not here today oftentimes look at people like us and they just say, those people are against everything. And that's not the reality, but that is the perception. So perception becomes reality in many people's minds. But the question So are we willing to be for people? So as we go into 2020, wow, 2020, it's starting off with a bang, isn't it? I mean, if you're on social media, you understand that we're close to World War III. I don't think we're close to World War III. But that's the fear, and the fearmongers are out. And by the way, there's an impeachment thing going on, and that's just adding a little level of crazy to our nation. And add to the crazy, it's an election year. And I say an election year is where United States of America collectively loses their mind for a year. And so this is where we are. Our world is losing its way. Our world is nuts. Our world is broken. So as we think about going into 2020, let me just share a few things here for you here today. We are for you. We are for you. Here's the reality. A lot of what we do is to help people be where they are and make next steps to draw closer to Jesus. In fact, next Sunday, we're going to start a new series, and we're calling this The One Thing That Changes Everything. And we're actually going to do a series on Bible study and quiet time. We're going to really kind of dig down to the individual level and say, this is how you study the Bible. This is what happens when you study the Bible. And we're actually going to have a panel. There's going to be 4 of us up here on February 2nd. And we're actually going to kind of unpack some of our struggles and some of our approaches to Scripture so people can see that we're real people, but also there's a real way to study the Bible to where it's life-giving. Also, we need to be what Jesus is for. In fact, we need to be for what Jesus is for. And so Jesus is for marriage. We're going to talk about marriage this year. Jesus is for prayer. We're going to talk about that. We're actually going to spend a long time talking about how we maintain our faith and our focus on Jesus in a world that is losing its way. We're going to talk about that quite a bit this year. But a lot of what Jesus is for is wrapped up in who he is for. And so we need to be for who Jesus is for this year, because whether it's us, whether it's here in this church, whether it's in our community, Jesus is truly for people. Now with this, 2 ways that you can own this. One way is this: bring your mess to Jesus. Jesus is willing to take your mess. He's willing to meet you in your mess, but his greatest desire is not to leave you there. But whether it be on a church level or individual level, let me say it like this: roll up your sleeves. Roll up your sleeves and get messy for the people that Jesus is for. In fact, I want to share something with you, and I've shared this the last couple of services. I got permission on this, but I would love for you to hear this, because to me, this represents church. This represents where I believe we need to be as a church, the attitude, the demeanor, and the interaction with people. A guy in our church, he and his wife, they shared this on Facebook on January 1st, and I texted him and say, can I use this? And so I'm going to use this right now. And I'm just going to I say it this way. We would like to start off 2020 by reminding everyone that our home is always a safe place if you need it. Our home is a place where you can come and not be judged while you blow off steam, cry, fall off your diet, sleep off some bad decisions, pray your hearts out to God, have a few beers or s'mores around the fire, or just need some quiet time to think. We want to stand beside you. We want to pray, celebrate, or even cry with you. Don't say or do something you'll regret this year. In 2020, our door and ears are open. That needs to be the rally cry of every follower of Jesus who is for the people that Jesus is for. Pray with me. Father God in heaven, thank you. Thank you for your vote for us through the cross. Thank you that you are for us. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.